listening to On the Way Home with your host, Michael Braithwaite.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of On the Way Home. I'm your host, Michael Braithwaite, working with the great folks at Blue Door. Check out all the great work they're doing at bluedoor.ca. Everything from our Construct program that is lifting people out of poverty and giving them a road forward and building the housing we need, of course, to our many different housing programs, including our Housing for All Land Trust, which is very, very cool. Building and adding units of housing into our trust that will be deeply affordable in perpetuity, not just for Blue Door, but for all sorts of organizations that are working with vulnerable populations. Let's get to today's guest. I have with me someone that I get inspired every time I see her, because it's a young person that is brilliant, full of ideas, and just doesn't say, hey, we should do this. She went and did it. So I'm talking about Cheryll Case. So Cheryll Case is the founder and executive director of CP Planning. And right out of her, during her undergrad, she wrote a paper that just caught fire and really went international and was used as a case study. And they really looked at this. So Cheryll decided to go out and start her own organization, CP Planning, 8 years ago. She's been doing it ever since. And we talk about that road to that, how that all got rolling. And we talk about some of the cool projects she's working on now, what makes CP Planning a little different, how she approaches things. We talk a little bit about, she talks a little bit about the inequity, different pieces, and how that conversation has changed. When I asked her, you've been at this for 8 years, what's changed? She talks about some of the good things that are happening since she started to now. We talk about some of the challenges in the work she's doing, some of the ideas she has to move things forward. And then we also talk about, hey, we've got two new governments, both provincially in Ontario, where she's located in Toronto, and as well federally just recently. And we talk about the opportunities there and much, much more. It's a wonderful conversation with a brilliant young person. I hope you get as inspired as I do in listening to Cheryll. Let's go to that conversation now. Cheryll, thanks so much for making the time to come on the podcast today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We ask everyone the same question because it's very personal, and I'd love to get I want to get your take on this, and that is, what does home mean to you?
Home to me is comfort. It's everything. It's, where you wake up, where you go to bed. It is where you lay your worries to rest and just focus on the basics, right? That's really what home is. It's really keeping that level of comfort where you can just think about the basic things in life, like family, for example, and food.
Love it. Now, talk to me a little bit about, you've got a really cool kind of journey into this work in this sector. You've done something really brave in starting your own organization, which is cool. Before we get to that, I'm hoping you could just walk me through how you got into the work you're doing today, some of your journey.
Yeah, sure. So CP Planning was founded in 2017, so right out of my undergrad. So we had an assignment. We did pick a problem and then propose a solution to that problem. And so the problem I chose was this curious mix of depopulating neighborhoods while also having a housing boom and a housing crisis. And so what I found is that 2/3 of the city's population was losing population, leading to really severe impacts to youth. So, for example, schools were closing, meaning that kids had to go further to get their education, which could have real impacts on their long-term success. And also you saw, bungalows being torn down and turned into larger houses, but you couldn't actually turn that same bungalow into an affordable multi-family house. And so there's this huge gap in the public discourse around development and access to affordable housing. And so I did this research report, and it was, meant for academic purposes in the school environment, but I thought it was really important what I had to say. And it turned out that a lot of other folks thought so as well. So it was picked up, I self-published this report. It was then picked up in the Toronto Star, Board of Trade talked about it. Institutions across the world. I had an art journal article in China, for example, talking about my research, which was really fascinating to see the impact of really good research data and really being able to tell a story of impact really well, what can happen from that. And so right after my undergrad, I jumped into consulting. And so my first project actually was funded by Evergreen and the Ontario Home Builders Association as part of their engagement with the what at that time was called the OMB, the Ontario Municipal Board, looking at issues around approvals for development along transit, because we're building all this transit, but are we actually building housing to follow that public investment? So that's where I was in 2017, just doing small projects, and I really stayed on that course. I'm still doing a lot of work around transit to this day. There needs to be better linkages in terms of how we build public infrastructure, and then who then benefits from that massive investment.
That's so cool. I mean, it takes, in my mind anyways, it takes a lot of courage, kind of hang your own shield, as they say, start something and say right off your undergrad to start something up. And you started up CP planning. So tell me all about CP planning. What is its purpose? And what are some of the things that it does?
Yeah, so its purpose, so we implement a human rights-based approach to planning. So this is informed by the United Nations at the international level, a lot of great detail on the right to housing, economic opportunities, cultural opportunities, and then also at the federal level, we have the National Housing Strategy Act, which aligns that international guidance around the fact that housing is a human right, and we are obligated to invest the fullest of our capacity to achieve that outcome where everyone has access to affordable housing. So that's a big part of our framework, but then also in Ontario, we're especially fortunate. And I think this fortune really does come from our communities. It was in 2011 when actually there was a group of nonprofit leaders in the space of housing access for those with disabilities who engaged with the City of Toronto as well as the Ontario Human Rights Commission, and called the disparity between these statements around human rights and housing, and resulted in the Ontario Human Rights Code actually being referenced in our provincial policy statements. Like, this is one of the highest level planning documents in the province. And so the obligation to plan consistent with the Ontario Human Rights Code, that everyone should have access to affordable housing. A lot of guidance from our Ontario Human Rights Commission on this as well. And so this has also informed our practice as well as research around the context of housing discrimination in the planning process and outcomes over the past over 100 years, since 1904. I can give you my first quote of an example of housing discrimination in planning. And so really that's the foundation of how we come to understand our work and know that we're not just kind of jumping into this in a period of time, but it's been a long movement of building awareness and confronting these systemic pressures that often deny us the ability to secure housing for folks. And so on a day-to-day basis, what does this actually mean? Well, on a day-to-day basis, what this means is that we actually work in partnership with community organizations across really, Toronto, Peel, Ottawa as our home bases, but we support across Ontario and across Canada in various capacities for community-based organizations, anchor organizations, to increase their role in local planning processes, but also to build stronger cross-sectoral partnerships and social capital, right? Because we know that the housing crisis is one that requires folks from all different disciplines, from finance to community engagement, from all sectors, public, private, and nonprofit. Also from all socioeconomic backgrounds, from homeowners to those very privileged and well off, to those who are most marginalized, to work together in solidarity to shift our land use planning economy and system to uphold and to be in alignment really with this fact that housing is a human right, because we're very capable and we have the resources to ensure that everyone has access to affordable housing. It's just the commitment and coordination is really what's missing, and so our role is really to help to facilitate at all levels, from the grassroots to cross-sectoral across industries, to shift how we do things.
So cool. I love that. Talk to me about some of the projects you've worked on. You've been at this now for 8 years, almost 8 years?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, wow. What are some of the projects? What are some of the things you've done that you could share with the podcast?
Yeah, so one of the most recent things that we've just completed is our first go at the project, the Roadmap for Redevelopment Plans to Confront Systemic Racism. So this project is, born off of the first 5.5 years of our practice. And so what we did here is we supported, communities across Ontario. We've engaged over 50,000 folks on aligning around, having more improved planning processes. We supported over 4,000 units of affordable housing to be proposed or advanced in collaboration with our partners. Hosted, hundreds of community meetings, build capacity within communities to build better partnerships with developers and with their government. And so with this project, we've come together and we've, in terms of, what are our next steps? Well, we've, build progress for affordable housing development. We've built capacity as well for better planning and planning outcomes. And so what's the next step? Well, what we've come to learn is that at the provincial level, as well as municipal level, there have been statements that have been made that I think have become greater, crystallized even further through our practice, and that is the fact that we really need to be investing in the labor in order to move things forward, right? So we know, for example, that there is a deficit in terms of the diversity of folks in the sector. We've been able to, build affordable housing and housing for those who are looking for shelter and provide emergency housing support services. Yeah, so the most recent project that we've completed is the most recent round of our roadmap for redevelopment plans to confront systemic racism. So this is a project that was funded by round 2 of the Housing Supply Challenge, and our stated goal is to end displacement really around transit. So we've invested in neighborhoods across Ontario, and we've been able to engage over 50,000 folks in our programs. This includes through hundreds of community level workshops as well as cross-sectoral industry workshops looking at solution building. So to give you an example of some of the things that we've been able to achieve with this engagement is we've actually supported for for nearly 4,000 units of affordable housing to be advanced in terms of through project plans or engagements with local governments for this to be built by the nonprofit sector. Really excited about that. And also we've been able to support stronger investment in terms of partnership development across sectors. One thing I'm really incredibly proud of is our partnership with the great leaders in Jane Finch neighborhood in Toronto, where we collaborate with the Urban Land Institute and City of Toronto to conduct the study around displacement. And so in this project, we were able to get 80 industry leaders from Vancouver to the United States, from CMHC all the way to grassroots organizers, to provide feedback to our incredible panel of 8 industry volunteers, what needs to be done in order to address the housing crisis, ensure that everyone can have access to affordable housing and not be pushed out due to transit investment. And so this incredible panel of 8 of volunteers on this panel put forward a list of 30 recommendations. And so their recommendations were to all levels of government. And so I could list, all 30 of them, but really I'm going to stick with to share with you what my favorite 3 are. And we're actually moving forward in the next steps to figure out what are the community's priorities. And so in any case, so they have 30 recommendations. And so my 3 favorite have been the idea of that 60% of existing affordable housing be protected. I have never heard that number said by anybody else yet at this point. 60% of new housing be affordable as well. So protecting existing 60%, as well as that 60% of new affordable housing be affordable, and then also to have a cross-sectoral partnership to oversee the development and implementation of strategic plans to achieve these targets. So these are my three favorite. But we've actually since then hosted a community workshop. So we actually had members of the Jane Finch neighborhood engage and share what were their priorities. And so I don't have it off the top of my head because we have the survey that also is going to be complementing it, because the community shared at that workshop what their three favorite ones were, but they also wanted to hear on a broader basis what the broader community consensus was around the priorities. And so one of the items that at the broad community level, we had the survey sent out to Jane and Finch leaders, and one of the things that they put out actually as their top priority was that they wanted to have greater accountability and analysis around if city strategies were working as well, right? Because we can't just be putting out these ideas and strategies, but not actually reviewing to see that these plans are working, right? They also called for greater investment into Black leaders to support their ability to gain jobs in the planning sector, to have be a part of the role, right? And so that outcome actually was really informative, as it's been a big part of helping us to figure out what our next steps are. CP Plan, we've been doing this work for, as you noted, 8 years now. And really when we started off, we were thinking about the fact that it's really a lack of engagement. But from this feedback from community, right, which included the fact that they actually want to not just be providing their feedback, but they actually want to have a role in the economy and having employment in this space. As noted in the survey, they talked about jobs and jobs access, but in the workshop that we hosted in Jane and Finch, they also noted that they've been talking about the need for these goals to be pursued. What's really been missing is actually that there's not been enough investment to build all the relationships required to actually move things forward, right? Like you think about any conversation with somebody, if you're trying to move them from position A to position B, it takes a lot of conversation. And so if you're trying to move entire systems, that's going to take a lot of conversation that requires a lot of investment, a lot of time. And so the unfortunate thing is that, when you look at the institutions of our society that are most invested in achieving affordable housing, we have a lot of individual actors and individuals who would be very committed, but really it does fall upon the government and nonprofit sectors to ensure that those commitments are followed through on and really reflective of community needs. But these are spaces also that frankly just don't have enough investment in them so that folks can spend the time required and build the skills required to move the needle forward, right? So an example I can give, another program of the roadmap, was that we did an assessment looking at a grassroots community group in Little Jamaica, Toronto, and we found that they were able to raise $100,000 to invest in affordable housing solutions, but they were actually, in addition, volunteering over $400,000 of labor, right? And so these are people who are incredibly committed and could achieve incredible things. In fact, they have, right? They've incorporated a community land trust. They've been able to get a developer to commit 7 units of affordable housing. We might get 100 units actually out of that site, fingers crossed. This is really on the backs of volunteers. And so when we think about making Canada a stronger and more resilient place, we really need to be investing in the labor for folks to have the capacity to have the conversations and move things forward. And this is something that was really well enforced in that Jane and Finch project, and then also in the community work that we do with communities. And so as part of our next steps with the roadmap, we have this concept of the Blueprint project. And this is really about actually mapping out what are the skills that are needed to move our economy forward. And then what's the level of investment that we're also needing to see to open up the capacity for folks to spend the time to move us forward so we can unlock the capital and unlock land to build affordable housing and ensure everybody is safe and home.
Amazing. Some great stuff happening. So since you started this over 8 years, what are some of the biggest changes you've seen from when you started this work to now? Is it getting better? Is it getting more challenging?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the things that have changed the most might be there's a lot more comfort in talking about equity and inequity. I think before it was a thing that the industry felt very uncomfortable about, and there might be very much parts of this industry that feel uncomfortable, right? I know that I'm still in somewhat of a bubble in terms of, the spaces I engage in are more comfortable speaking about these things. And so I'm appreciative at least that this bubble has gotten bigger. But I do look forward to the day when also, because there's a ton of conferences out there that are meant just for investors, and those conferences should also be having ample space to talk about the things that we are also very committed to, because frankly, so that's where a lot of the power is held. So I think that would be the main difference, is that the number of people talking about these issues in terms of equity, in terms of access to be a part of this economy, right? So, talking about the size of the labor pool, for example, is one of the issues, right? We need to have more planners. I'll, even quote the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing years ago noted that we need more urban planners. Municipal governments have said that they need more urban planners. Home builders associations and advocacy groups have noted that we need more planners. And planners are not just the folks who look at zoning bylaw approvals. It's quite a complex role that includes anything from looking at sites to building relationships to making plans. And so we need all of it. But also it's about the diversity of folks who are in these spaces, right? So to give you an example, within Black communities, we did a study looking at diversity of folks within the land use planning sector, and we found that less than 2% of those in leadership positions were Black, and it was about 4 to 5% in the industry more generally that were Black. But then you look at who's most impacted by housing inaffordability. Black communities are one of the most impacted, more likely to rent. In terms of homelessness, very much overrepresented. And so has there been much movement in that space? I think that there is real efforts to do so, right? And I'm really grateful for leaders like the United Way has been doing a really great job. They've actually invested in one of Speed Planning's projects. We are co-lead in the development of the Black Community Housing Advisory Table. And so this is a bunch of Black leaders as well as allies who look at addressing housing issues for Black communities. And so they actually supported investing in some of our refugee housing services programming, noting the fact that Black communities are excluded oftentimes. And why is it so important that we actually address this deficit? I think I want to make sure that point is also really quite clear. And so the reason why it's important to ensure that the diversity of folks in the sector is there is because once folks are in the space, they can actually then use the tools of that space to help to meet the needs of their communities, right? So we have a total supply labor gap. So it's not that we don't have enough space for adding in more people to the space, right? So that's not an issue at all. So we need more people into the space. And so getting more Black people or other racialized or marginalized groups into the space, the value is that they will be able to then leverage those tools for their communities. So I have an exact example of what that looks like. So the Black Community Housing Advisory Table, I think it was 2022 or 23 when the African refugee crisis was really coming to a boil. And we had a meeting, a Black Community Housing Advisory Table meeting. And in that meeting, one of the members, who's a leader of a foundation, he noted that on the call he had a church, and the church was ready to bring some buses down to pick up people to bring them over to their church, right? We also had someone else on the call who is a leader of this actually the person on the call is my co-lead of BChat, which is Diane Walter from Margaret's Housing Community Support Services. So she knows how to run and operate emergency housing services, right? And so that day we decided no one had this plan in advance. Maybe the foundation guy had some kind of inkling, but we decided, the buses are there, the church is ready. So I canceled all of my meetings that day, headed down to 29 Peter Street, took names and started to help coordinate folks actually to go over to that church. And then my colleague, Diane, then seconded her staff to then set up an emergency crisis response center at the church. So we were able to apply our professional skills to help things out. I helped on the communications front on the program as well. And so this happened because Black people were in the spaces where they had the tools to then pull from to meet the community needs. And so, that's one example in terms of, when a marginalized group is a part of a sector and how they're able to leverage it. And I can give you an example that's on the other end. When we look at housing access, CMHC actually did a study and we found that Italian communities actually have the highest homeownership rates, right? And so why is that relevant? Well, you think about the construction trades, they're very well represented in that space. So they're actually able to then use those tools to help them to have access to housing, right? So that's one of the things that has changed, is that there's a bit more support to the understanding that these types of inequities exist. And I think also a commitment to address these inequities as well.
Very cool. So recently, we've had quite a few changes in the last 4 months in government. We've got a new provincial government in Ontario, and we've gotten a new but a renewed government federally with a minority government, but a big pledge around housing. What are some thoughts? What does the future look like for Cheryll Case and CP planning?
Yeah, so in terms of the elections, I'm really quite excited to see where things go. There's been a lot of things that have been said by Prime Minister Mark Carney that make me quite optimistic. I think the commitment to investing in our infrastructure as a nation is a really important one, and to that I offer the importance of really investing in our skills as a nation, right? So I think that a lot of attention has been put towards, for example, investing in trades labor, and I think that was incredibly important work to do. But unfortunately, what we've come to see is that, well, if the economy is falling down around us, there's not going to be the jobs there. And so we really need to have our economy be taken care of. And so I think part of the answer to that question around how do we have an economy that's taken care of is that we really invest in the type of work that helps take care of the economy. And what type of work does that include? I really fundamentally believe it's investing in the capacity of our labor force to invest in building out those relationships that can unlock capital into affordable housing development, right? For example, talking to churches or nonprofits and private property owners and encouraging them to leverage their property and develop affordable housing on their sites. There's tons of sites that are just ready and waiting to be developed on, but it takes a lot of time to actually have those required conversations, right? So that's why we're really committed to building out a proposal for a jobs program where we see anchor agencies across Canada actually receive the capacity to do that local hiring so they can invest in doing that engagement with their local stakeholders to see affordable housing built in their neighborhoods. And this is something that I think all sectors can get behind, right? Because we know that currently these anchor agencies may not have the skill sets of knowing how to engage in planning, but what they are really good at is engaging their community, right? I can give you one example of a case study here in Toronto where we had a community anchor agency that in this case actually had a lot of great expertise in planning and development, and they're in a neighborhood where they were able to get their local councillor to commit to invest in anti-displacement solutions. And so they actually had all the city divisions from planning to housing, development, social development, invest a ton of time into seeing how they can address the displacement issue, but also increasing affordable housing supply. And their councillor was not something that you would typically see supporting this type of outcome, but because the community anchor agency had those deep community connections and were able to get people out to support, we were able to see that transition. And so, one of the things we've heard from the sector is that there's a lack of political will to actually carry through and invest in affordable housing in terms of the capital cost of affordable housing. And so the way that you address that issue of the political will is really investing in your community, because the community will be there to help keep our governments accountable. And so investing in anchor agencies is incredibly important for that end. And so I would really love to support our government in building out and implementing a strategy for getting Canada to where it needs to be on a labor front on that side. And, I was going to add as well, like, I know that there are a lot of private sector consultants who would be more than happy to contribute their skills to these place-based anchor agencies as well. So then there are the piece around capital investments into housing. And so we're doing a lot of work to explore how can we actually unlock relationships with banking institutions, with pension funds, and with government to ensure that the investments into capital align with community interests. As there is money out there, but again, are we really investing it in the way that we need to be? And also, how can we unlock further funds? And so these are the two things we're really focused on in the coming year. I'm really excited to talk with government around what this can look like and how we can really generate some meaningful results as a result of this engagement.
Very cool. Well, hey, I hope they listen to you, because you got lots of ideas that can move us forward for sure. If someone's watching this podcast and wants to connect with you, wants to hire CP Planning, find out more about what you're doing, where can they go?
Yeah, so they can email me directly at CHERYLL.CASE@cpplanning.ca, and also call my work phone at 647-905-0197.
Very cool. Cheryl, every time I see you at a lot of different forums around affordable housing. It gives me, I get inspired, because to see someone like yourself who's so young and full of passion and brilliance moving, you're the one who's going to move the needle forward. So thank you for all you do and you continue to do. Thank you for your courage to kind of move forward, see a gap and fill it. It's so appreciated, and can't wait to see what you get up to in the future.
My pleasure. And really, it's folks like you that inspire me. So an honor.
All right. You're welcome back anytime. You're you're doing great work. So I can't wait to have you back and talk about some of those projects. Until next time, we'll see you on the way home.
You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Michael Braithwaite.